Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Heritage Preservation Commission meeting for Monday, December 16th. Thank you all for coming here. If anybody, start over. The HPC meeting minutes from 11:18, if everybody's had a chance to read them, I would be looking for an acceptance of the meeting.
I will make a motion to accept the meeting for November 18th of 2024.
Second?
I'll second.
All right. Well, now I got myself messed up here. How do I get back to that? There we go. We've got some discussion on some old business with SHPO's Fall Conference 2025. And Elwood and I had the pleasure of working with two of the SHPO people that are here today to look at some of the possibilities, where to have everything and all that kind of good stuff. So,
Yeah, we went around and looked at different venues for the registrations and meetings and for the meals. So I guess if we want Mike or Lily to come up and talk to us a little bit and explain a little bit what the conference is all about and what we're looking for, and give some information to the HPC Commission so we can move forward from there. And John Nisley's been working on the grant for the conference. He's got a good start on that. The preliminary grant application is due in mid-January, and the final is in mid-February, I believe.
Yes.
So we're working on that with Mr. Coop and SHPO, and we'll let Mr. Coop explain what we're looking for and what's HPC Commission's involvement.
Thanks, Elwood.
You bet.
Thank you for inviting us to come to the meeting. And for Lillian, this is a first visit to New Ulm.
It's been lovely.
And I didn't even get a chance to bore her with details about Artstone buildings. Near and dear to my heart. See, I uttered Artstone literally as we parked the car to come in, and that was as far as I got. Because there's so much else to see, which is kind of a theme that we end up running into frequently when we host the conference, that the local community often has an abundance of sites and venues and buildings and so forth. So it's not so much a matter of finding what will work for the conference, it's eliminating what we don't necessarily need to use, because there's just so many options. And that's kind of what we ran into today. So as Elwood said, we started out looking at Turner Hall, and then we eventually made our way downtown. And I communicated with a couple of people that, in my opinion at least, for the conference, which is a Wednesday evening opening reception followed by all-day Thursday and then Friday morning sessions, and then tours Friday afternoon typically, we like to have 3 spaces that work for presentations that are given, by people talking to a crowd. And there's minimum numbers and so forth, but we usually like to have those 3 spaces that are relatively close to each other. This year, when we had the conference in Red Wing, it worked to do it basically in the downtown. And so when Deb and Jeannie came, they got to experience it firsthand. That doesn't always work in every city that we go to. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out here is, will it work to try to find buildings in the downtown that could accommodate, different concurrent sessions, the presentations themselves, but also the lunches that we'll do, the breakouts, the coffee breaks. We typically have like a keynote address where everybody has to sit together, so we need a really big space that'll work for that. The alternative would be to cross Broadway and go up to Turner Hall and try to have everything up there, and then maybe use the theater at the former Union School. In my opinion, and I expressed this in the emails to both Elwood and Deb, that I don't think it's a matter of being able to use both of those, where we could potentially have some of the things, for instance, at Turner Hall, and then still have some things happening downtown during the daytime. We'd lovely to have like a reception, for instance, at the Grand or something else where we can get people downtown. And that's the reason that we do the conference and host it in the downtown areas rather than staying at the Best Western and having all the sessions out there. When I know that the hotels like that can accommodate that type of event, but that's not what the State Historic Preservation is off, that's not what we're about. So right now, we're at that kind of early stage, although the application, the grant application that John will be working on is due, relatively soon. We still have enough time to talk through what our options might be and what venues, we'd be using. So that's where we stand as far as like picking some things. And in terms of, what involvement the Preservation Commission and all of you will have, it kind of depends on what your level of interest is. And, there are certain people that always sort of step up and do more than others. And, depending on what time both Elwood and John have, I rely pretty heavily on them to pull together certain things that I don't have access to, whether it's the rental rates for the venues we're going to be using or caterers, for instance, that we might work with. Lillian has a big role to play in terms of helping to identify some of the food and the catering that we might work with. But, the costs are handled differently than in the grant. So there's money that can be spent for food that, that cannot be spent on other things. So we have to work that out. But that's where, open communication between all of us is really helpful. And I think, in the past, when the conference has been held in cities that are really excited about it, one way that the commission members get involved is for that opening reception, location to be determined at this point. Maybe there's things that have to be done in advance to get ready for it. So, for instance, in Red Wing this year, that event was held at the Pottery Museum, and they had their own board, but there were other people that wore multiple hats. And so there were folks that were showing up at the Pottery Museum where they literally provided food through basically a volunteer effort. And there were some costs, nominal that the city picked up that we didn't ask them to do. But my point is, some of the commission members, showed up early and they were helping to set up chairs, for instance, or set up some of the food that was, being provided. So, not a huge lift, but the kinds of things that, if it isn't done by some volunteers or locals, it'll probably fall more likely on the shoulders of either SHPO staff or somebody else that we might end up hiring, so that's one role where it's really helpful to have the HPC stepping up. I didn't have any prepared notes thinking about the meeting proper and what we would end up, needing to cover. This is where it's always easy to punt and look at my colleague and say, Lillian, what am I forgetting? Because we did a great job seeing a lot of really, I think, terrific options, as I mentioned, for the venues. It's really going to be more a matter of whittling things down, and that's going to be probably a conversation that the two of us need to have with Elwood and John together. So the four of us, we might end up participating in a conference call, and certainly involving Deb, because you were involved with our meeting today. That's probably important as well. So
I think the only thing we would mention are who are the audience of attendees, and then maybe this process of getting presentation suggestions.
Yep.
How that's jury.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I did sort of forget entirely about the audience, which is often what people ask about. We try to bill this as a preservation conference for everyone, and so it's not necessarily intended for instance, just people that have a really specific interest in historic preservation proper, or consultants that we work with. And in fact, I'd love to get more consultants to come, because I think that they can benefit from making the connections between the work that they do, providing their services, as well as the work that our office is interested in having people who are qualified to do those consulting services. But beyond that, it's a range of lay people that are coming in. By and large, the biggest majority for sure is going to be fellow commission members just like yourselves. And then sometimes, if they've got a really supportive city council, there might be a council member from that same city that's going to show up as well. We've even had elected officials, a mayor, or 2 or 3 in attendance. And I like it when that happens because it demonstrates that that city's really interested in, what's going on locally. And I think they can benefit from it. So that ends up, as I mentioned, the commission members, the city staff that work with those commissioners, some elected officials, some of the, the planning and zoning staff folks, they make up a large percentage. But then beyond that, there are always just interested individuals, people that are just, following the work of our office. We get a lot of professionals from different areas, whether it's archaeology or architects, historians, folks that have worked with us for a while. So it's kind of a wide range in terms of the audience. There's often people that show up that, I've never met, and I'm surprised how they find out about it. And it's fun to meet them and learn, that they're interested in hearing more about what we're doing in our world of preservation. So that hopefully answers a little bit more about, the audience. We typically get, this past year for Red Wing rather, this year we had, I think officially, what was close to 190 or a little over.
I think with the 2 days, it was just about 200.
Yeah, I mean, we were pushing the limits. Lillian reminded me, so the St. James Hotel downtown, which some of you may have, been inside and had a meal in, or maybe even stayed in, we thought that they would be able to accommodate our big lunch where, everyone was together, and it turned out they actually had a capacity of something like 178, and so we kind of had standing room only. Our staff were instructed to wait and make sure that everybody got their food first, and it worked out in the end. But, that's something that we do have to be wary of, and it's not a downside to going the alternate route of, not staying at a conference hotel, like the Best Western, for instance. But I like those challenges. I like being able to, showcase some of the properties. And if you've been to that upper floor at the St. James, you know that it has an amazing view looking out on the river. So that was a real bonus for that particular part of it. What was the other thing that you were bringing up?
The
About
process of sessions?
the sessions, yeah. So obviously the conference has a lot of educational presentations and these concurrent sessions. We typically do 3 concurrent, so there might be, a block of 3 for a 90-minute block in the first part of the morning, and then a break, and then another block of 3 for the second part of the morning, and then repeat that in the afternoon on Thursday, and then same kind of thing on Friday morning. That process involves typically our office sort of sending out a notice to this massive mailing list that we've accumulated over the course of time that I'm not even sure how many people are on it, how many emails, but it's pretty large. And it's kind of just a call for session proposals. So anybody that has an idea for a topic that they want to talk about, they're welcome to submit a proposal. And we actually have a very, kind of prescribed format of, here's some questions that you should think about answering. This is the information that you need to provide to us. And then they just submit that electronically. And then we look at that and review all the ones that come in. And we try to accept, as many as we possibly can. But I'll admit, this year when we were in Red Wing, we had 4 concurrent sessions that were running. And there's a benefit to that because you can accept more proposals. You can hear more about what people are doing research and reporting on. The downside is that in the evaluations we get, there's often people that are saying, you had too many session options. I I couldn't figure out what I wanted to go to, you know, and that's a good problem to have, I guess, sometimes, not always. I think, given what we're seeing here, it's probably more likely that we'll opt for having just 3 concurrent sessions, which is still plenty. It still provides really, you know, great opportunities to learn. And, you know, we'll figure out the logistics of it later on. But that process involves, as I said, sending out the notice, and then people submit the proposals. There are several folks in my department, myself included, kind of a small team where we review those and then decide on, you know, do we have a theme that's emerging? Are there some natural sessions that kind of work well together? Are there some that are outliers that just don't make sense to include? You know, it varies from year to year, and then we'll pick, you know, whatever we think will work. And yes, we end up rejecting some proposals, but I go to other professional conferences that have, you know, more like 700 people, where there are folks presenting, and I'm sure many of you have, over the years, gone to different conferences as well. And, you know, you can't accept everything. That's just the reality of it. So, you know, we do our best to get what we think are the topics that'll be of interest. And I always tell the local community and the commission members in particular that if there's something that, you know, you're really keenly interested in telling us about, then by all means, submit a proposal. And it doesn't have to be about, you know, a particular building per se or a project, something that's happened recently. It could be something that, you know, took place years ago that you've had time to, you know, mull over and think about, you know, how has this played out in the community, you know, whether it's a building rehab or, you know, whatever it might be. I mean, we did drive up to Herman, to the monument, and I know that's on John's mind and probably a lot of you as well, just, you know, what's going to happen with it. That might end up being a proposal where, you know, somebody wants to do a session talking about long-term viability of Herman as a monument. You know, what's the preservation cycle going to show us going forward? What will ultimately be the outcome for that? I mentioned as we were pulling out of the parking lot that in my really early days working at SHPO, and I've been there before I had a lot of gray hair, I'll just leave it at that. I remember going up there with some of my former colleagues, and, you know, there were issues back then. That was, you know, and then Elwood reminded me, well, there have been issues with that since the 1950s, you know, probably before some of us were even born. So it's an ongoing story and saga, and I think it's a compelling topic. So that would be something, for instance, that would be, you know, fun to learn about. I have an interest in the Artstone buildings, and, you know, we have had the conference in New Ulm before, so I think it was 2002, thereabouts. And I remember actually giving a talk about Artstone buildings, because I had been doing a lot of research on them at that time. And I know we included some on a tour as well, so that was part of it. And maybe there's something to be learned about, you know, what's been happening at the Shell Brewery Complex with, the, you know, some of the new construction that's going on there, some of the building rehabs that have been happening. So if that's a topic that all of you know more about, certainly than any of us, you know, that would be fun to learn about as well. So those are, you know, a few of the small ways I think that the HPC can get involved, you know, from the standpoint of thinking about venues. I remember when I met with Red Wings Preservation Commission early on, before we had decided on some of the sites that we were going to end up using for the actual, you know, events like the opening reception that's on Wednesday night. They had a short laundry list of probably 5 or 6 sites that they had come up with. And I was really interested because they had kind of narrowed it down to 1 or 2, and then eventually this one. And then they did an about face, and they changed their mind after they had had conversations with a few property owners and some other things that came up. You know, so that's allowed. I mean, we definitely need to know at some point, where are we going? But my point is, you know, I rely a lot on you all to help us figure out what will work best for that kind of an event. And certainly, you know, Deb can be kind of your primary contact, I think, in terms of the connection and the thread for working with us because of the tour that we did today. You know more about what we might be looking for. For that opening reception, you know, I remind folks that it's often something that's kind of unique, a building that's distinctive, maybe a property that isn't open to the public, but I wouldn't rule out Shells, because even though that is open to the public, there's probably a large percentage of folks that have never been there, you know, that might come to the conference. Or if they have been, they, like me, were there 15 or 20 years ago and they haven't been back. Things change over time, so it's fun to make a return visit. We actually had the opening reception once at a large private residence. Now, that was in the earlier days when we had a smaller crowd, but, you know, we typically get close to 100 people, maybe a few under that, for that opening reception. So it does need to be a space that's large enough to accommodate a big crowd. And I will say, there's certainly someone here who's probably wearing the hat of the representative for the Brown County Historical Society, you know, that's on the HPC. There's some finger pointing. Hi, Darla. Hi. Good to see you. Nice to see you. We had the reception there when the conference was in New Ulm before, and I think it was okay. It was fine. My recollection of that space is that it was wonderful to get sort of a grounding about the history of the community, you know, because that's exactly what the museum does. But it didn't work quite as well as a space for a large group of people to kind of be able to walk through, and, you know, see the entire building as if it was almost empty, and which I know would never happen. But my point is, you know, I think you have to think a little bit about how that space is going to be used when there's this large group of people that come in. So just thinking back to what we did just this year in Red Wing with the conference, when that reception was at the Pottery Museum, it's a very sort of long, linear, open building, one floor. And you could literally walk from one end to the other and see different things, and that was informative. And the way that they had set up everything up, there were little stations where you could kind of, you know, check in on a guy that was actually on a wheel, that he had a pile of clay that he was creating something out of that. You know, adjacent to that, they had a person on a guitar playing music. There was some food stations in different areas. And then there was the museum that had all of the pottery, you know, which is sort of a separate section. So it varies depending on, you know, one location to the other, but you do have to have enough space, you know, that can accommodate a large group. So I'm not really sure at this point what properties are going to rise, you know, to the top in terms of what we're thinking about. And we can talk about that right now. I mean, I'm not the one that needs to do all the blabbing tonight. I'm happy to hear feedback from all of you, not just about the potential, you know, opening reception venue, but some other things as well. And Deb, feel free to, you know, weigh in if there's things about, like I said, the opening reception, you know, that are important to you to remind everyone about. That's, you know.
Well, I guess I think everybody's probably pretty much aware of what, you know, some of the, everybody's probably got a special spot in New Ulm of their own. You know, I guess I would like to hear what these guys have to say, and hopefully it'll help us make a decision on what we're going to pursue.
And I guess it would help me to know as well. I mean, I recognize some of the names from all of you, but I'm curious, how many of you have been to our statewide conference? So roughly half. And I know that some members rotate off and then, you know, they're not going to have an opportunity to go, but that's really helpful. So at least you have a recollection of a little bit of, you know, the way that it operates.
Deb, you think, is the grant big enough for the
No.
opening ceremony?
No.
I didn't think so either.
Turner Hall, of course, has the best setup for everything, you know. But it also leaves us, if we want to stay on this side of Broadway, Or do you want to stay?
I'm just talking for the opening ceremony Wednesday night.
I know, but if we're going to use that as our venue, that becomes our main source for the other days too. We go back to that place unless,
Anybody remember what we did last time? I don't remember.
Well, we
I
had the
attended
opening.
it, but I don't remember.
Yeah, the opening reception was that at the Brown County Museum, at their Historical Society.
Okay.
Used Turner Hall afterwards.
that's right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He's right.
But
I
I'm
mean,
glad, Dave, I'm glad that you brought up the Grand because it reminded me of something else that I should have mentioned earlier, which is, it's not a requirement, and it's certainly something that, depends on where we go each year. But some cities have kind of on their own, taken on this idea that, hey, it'd be fun to do something informal on the Thursday night that people could attend. It's not like a formal event or an educational talk or anything of the sort, but there have been conferences for not every year, but again, just thinking about the most recent one in Red Wing, the staff person that I worked most closely with at the city he's a friend of this restaurant owner downtown, and it's a building that actually is quite large, and they set up a trivia night. And so it was kind of announced both on the webpage, but also informally, hey, if anybody wants to show up at I'm blanking on the name of the place, but, here's the time that people will be there. The benefit was that if you wanted to have a meal, you could go there and eat dinner. If you wanted to hang out and play trivia, you could do that as well. And you knew that there would be people from the conference who were going to be there. So the reason I mention it is, one thought is, if, as a part of the conference planning, you're interested in perhaps thinking about doing something for that Thursday, that might be another opportunity to get folks downtown, which is what we want to promote. And the Grand could be like one possible location where folks could go and they know that, hey, there's this conference and folks are going to show up, and be prepared. There might be a crowd. And it doesn't have to be anything formal. It doesn't have to be like a planned, it would be planned obviously, but it doesn't have to be like a special kind of an event. Just sort of a notification that, hey, we're going to, offer this opportunity. And then building on that, it reminds me as well that sometimes, when I was growing up, the town that I lived in, Thursday night was a big night for shopping downtown. And I'm not sure if that's still the case anymore in small communities, smaller cities. But I don't know if your businesses are open on Thursday nights.
Some
they?
are.
Some?
some aren't.
Because one thought, and we've done this, I think we did it in St. Cloud pretty successfully. Where else? I think it happened in Hastings. In any event, we work with an organization like the Chamber of Commerce, or Visit New Ulm, whatever it might be. It could be a combination of those together and others, where they notify the businesses that, there's this conference that's going to be in town. There will be people coming. And on Thursday, if you're willing to stay open, we'll promote it and maybe try to figure out a way to get folks downtown. And I don't know if there's a way to, offer something special to the attendees in the way of like a discount, but that actually was done in, I think, one or two cities.
But no, I know that was a special Thursday night where we could go shopping and you got an extra 20% or something like
Yes.
that.
Right.
Yeah, it was one on it, yeah.
And the chamber
Yeah.
would be happy to help us put that together because they are constantly involved with their business people downtown especially.
I figured as much.
Yep.
I don't want to do the proverbial, force the round hole into the square peg. So if the businesses are not typically open on a Thursday, and they have lives. I understand they're running a business and they, want to spend time with families. So that's tough if you're asking them to do a lot more. And we can't guarantee that it's going to result in a huge, boost in their sales. But if it's something that maybe has happened before and we can build on it, that might be an option. And the idea is that folks can come downtown and shop a little, but then they might also have a place to go, whether it's the Grand or somewhere else, and hang out and meet and have a drink and socialize a little bit, before they retire to their room, at the hotel.
I just had a question of Deb, maybe. Is the Kaiserhof and the K-Bar big enough to have a reception on
We
Thursday
did
night?
stop there today. I guess that'll be up to them to decide if they could accommodate us. It's going to be tight, but we don't know for sure yet. It just depends how many people show up. If we have 200-plus people, might get a little tight. If we're under, 175, whatever, it'd be a possibility.
But if we
But
could,
we don't know that,
But if you could do that and the Grand, they
Yep.
have a choice where they want it to go.
Yep.
We could still work something out with either one of them for a Thursday night get-together, too. Otherwise, Thursday nights are usually left open for them to go and eat wherever they want to eat. If they want to experience downtown eating, they've got plenty of places to go to, so.
Right.
But,
And there's always that sort of tension with, when we get our evaluations back, there's often people that will say, loved the flexibility in the schedule and being able to do this and that on my own time. And then other people will say, wow, you offered just way too much programming. I didn't have enough of my free time to do anything, So it's kind of a trade-off. If you're offering a Wednesday night opening reception and then you're doing something on Thursday as well, that's sort of programmed, it's part of the conference, people think, wow, when am I going to, have my own downtime? I go to this conference, I want to relax. But our feeling is that if we're gathering all these people together, let's help them network in some way.
Right.
If they're interested. And there's no obligation, so, but the thought is as well, that by Thursday, anybody that's going to the conference, unless they're only registering for Friday morning, they'll be there. And so we're going to have the largest group of folks gathered. And that's when it's nice to bring them all together, whether it's at the Kaiserhof or somewhere else.
I don't know if we want to discuss it tonight or if we have another meeting probably in between our next January meeting to discuss, or whoever wants to be involved with working with this on decision-making. So, because we need a deadline to get information back to SHPO in order to get stuff rolling here, so.
And I did remind John, so we have our grant application that the city applies for, which really kind of helps underwrite pulling the conference off. And, that money is there for you to use to pay for, the venue rental, renting buses, whatever the cost might be. And we want to make sure you get everything you need for it. Typically, I know because I just got the numbers from Red Wing. I forgot what we awarded them. I think it was in the neighborhood of 15, 16,000. They ended up spending less than that, by a fair amount. And that's because they were just so amazing about getting a lot of in-kind contributions, not necessarily from, the commission members, but the businesses, anybody that was involved. But my point is, for that draft application that comes in, whenever that deadline is that I'm forgetting, for the first one, that's like a suggested date. And so, if I know that I'm going to get an application, and I know I will, it's not the end of the world if the numbers are not exact and, we still have time to negotiate or talk or whatever. And then there's that final application deadline in early March or whatever it is. So there's plenty of time built in between those two dates to kind of fine tune everything. And then on top of that, and I'm looking at you, John, specifically about this because within the budget, we can move numbers around. So if this has actually happened in Red Wing, we had allocated a certain amount that was going to go toward the keynote speaker, and the person we ended up getting was, he was employed by a university, and so he couldn't take a keynote honorarium. And that was not by his choice. I mean, we offered and said, but this is above and beyond. And he said, no, that's okay. So literally, whatever was allocated in that, line item, we couldn't use it. And so we could shift the money around. We're allowed to do that. So I think that makes it a little bit easier. And I don't want to put any of you on the spot, like, oh, we have to talk about this now and hash some things out. It's like you said, Deb, if you have another meeting coming up and it's easier to kind of just chat informally, and if John's here or not, doesn't make any difference as far as I'm concerned. You know, you can mull some things over and, you know, make some soft decisions at that point.
Well, I'm just thinking it
Entirely
might
up
give
to
some
you.
of these guys time to think about what's important to them instead of brainstorming tonight. And let's put something together and soon. We'd have to do it soon, before our next scheduled meeting.
Which is when?
Well, we're going to decide that tonight yet.
Well, roughly
But I would say-
mid-January.
Yeah.
That January
beginning.
22nd or 23rd for the next meeting.
Okay, yeah, so about 5 weeks.
But, yeah, we
But
can
I'd
look
like
at
to see
something
a
earlier.
work session before that.
Right.
Right, we can have something before that.
And like I said, that work session, the result doesn't have to be, you know, that it's cast in concrete, we're doing this and we're not gonna deviate at all. There can be flexibility built in about a number of different things, whether it's the sites we're gonna use as venues to the budget, you know, whatever.
I guess what I'm interested in is after today's visit, what your recommendation is going to be for the places we saw. Because we didn't really make a final decision
Nope.
today, but I guess I want to see what you guys think is going to work, and then we can maybe go from there.
Yes,
So the sooner you get back to us on what you feel comfortable is going to handle the accommodations that you want, and then we can go from there.
yeah, and I
So-
think, I mean, Lily and I can talk on the way home tonight, and we can, you know, potentially get something to you in a couple of days,
That'd
as
be
far as
fine.
I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, then I would suggest that we schedule just as a meeting about this, probably the beginning of January, as soon as possible.
I'll have to look and see what dates are open.
And that's
for-
all we'll
for
discuss
meetings.
for that meeting. There won't be anything else unless something comes up. But then
No,
we
well,
can go
that's-
from there if that's okay with you.
Yeah, like I said, I'll have to look and see what what dates are open for here for meetings and stuff,
Okay.
and I'll send
Sounds
that
good.
out.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm just curious, because I was, as you mentioned, you know, future meeting and work and so forth. When you're having your other regular meetings, you know, when folks like us are not in attendance, do you have a heavy load of either building permit reviews or other work that's occupying your time? I'm just kind of curious.
Usually it's one or two items at a meeting,
Mhm.
but there's been times we can go 4 or 5 months without a meeting. There's no agenda items.
Yep,
Yeah. But yeah, it's usually one or two. So,
okay.
not huge.
Good to know.
Enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you don't have enough, then I sometimes get concerned about that, just from the standpoint that your own city council might, you know, wonder like, well, why are you meeting then if you're not doing anything, or you don't need to meet? What's the purpose? And I don't know the makeup of the council, so, but I remember there was a time some years ago where, you know, we were kind of in a battle, trying to remember the details of that, but it had to do with the ordinance specifically and the language that was in there. So, it seemed like at that time, you know, preservation was not necessarily as friendly a term, I guess. So maybe a lot of things have changed since then.
Well, the guidelines haven't been looked at for a long time either. I don't know when our book was published. I said maybe it's time to review that a little bit too, to see if we can open it up
Yeah,
to something
Yeah, 2018 was the last time we updated the guidelines.
18.
Yep.
So it's been a while. I mean,
yes,
I'm sure there's some of those guidelines we have to keep, but there's also maybe an extension of what we could do to soften it up a little bit so people aren't afraid to come and apply for whatever they need. I mean, they should know that we offer money to have signage made, and we can help them, you know, with things like that too, so. But
exactly.
we have to do it within the guidelines, so.
Yeah, and I totally forgot about that funding. I remember John and I talked about that quite a while ago. But I forget from city to city who has grants or loans or whatever there might be, some incentive programs. The carrots are always great.
That's right.
Can I just clarify one thing? So you guys are gonna be lining up locally, though, the tours on Friday. They're probably all local.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's probably a big way to
Yeah, and I appreciate you referencing that, John, because I didn't really make that point clear at all, which is that for the tours, you know, we do rely pretty heavily on the commission and anybody else, you know, whether it's former commission members or somebody like Terry Sweeney, you know, who's clearly knowledgeable, and my understanding is his daughter-in-law has a business now, or at least I read about that. But
Correct.
anyway, you know, for tours, I have my own preferences about things to see or, you know, stuff to look at or that I think might be of interest. But you all know best, you know, what is available or what, you know, is accessible and most easily seen and found and so forth. There have been instances, next step. Thank you. In the past where we've taken the tours, at least one of them, outside of the city limits. And, you know, just because the conference is in New Ulm proper, it doesn't mean that it has to, the tour has to stay right here in town. But I also remember speaking with somebody once who said, yeah, but we have plenty to see here. Why would we want to go outside the city limits, you know, and look at anything outside of town? And I get that, you know, they were making the point that they are very proud of what they have, and, you know, we want to showcase what we've got here. But if there are sites that you have in mind that I'm blanking on, I mean, the only example I could think of is the state park within the city limits. Okay, so that wouldn't be a good example, but if it were outside, you know, there might be a reason to go look at the WPA buildings, for instance, or talk about a preservation conundrum that they're dealing with. But generally the tours, you know, we offer typically 3. That's usually the number, and they're usually 3 hours, so from 1 to 4 o'clock. If they end early, you know, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. And you can look online and probably find our programs from the past conferences, but, you know, we've often done something that might be, for instance, a walking tour combined with being on a bus and looking at some things throughout the city, or it might focus on a residential area. You know, you have the luxury of having several historic districts, both residential and commercial, so those could be highlighted. So, you know, it's kind of wide open in terms of what to actually look at and, you know, what would be the ideal or a combination of all those. So that, I'm glad you asked about that, John. I mean, I like to know, I feel like that's a part of the process where I still get involved and give feedback. So I like to know, like, you know, what are the details about the tour, and if you're going to stop at particular sites and look at them, you know, how long are you going to spend there? Who's going to be on the bus talking? Because the tours are ideally, you know, they're going to be educational. They're not going to be just, here's another historic site that's of interest to us locally. It's wonderful to have a compelling preservation story behind it. So one example I can think of would be, you know, even though we may or may not go to the former Union School, it would be interesting to have a tour that would go there and point out, for instance, that this was a historic tax credit project that's, you know, converted from a school to housing, but it also has this unique arrangement with a separate theater space that's owned by a different entity within the building, you know, which is pretty unique. Those are the kinds of things that people like to look at, and it tells, you know, a side of the preservation story that we don't always hear about. So just a few examples. So to the extent that, yeah, city staff want to get involved in that too and work collaboratively with the commission, you know, that's great.
Well, one thing. Grants, I don't know. They involve. In looking at these communities who also applied for the grant monies for these conferences, not only was it the HPC, they involved a lot of the other local experts who are involved with any type of historic preservation, for Brown County, Historical Society, you name it, they involved a lot of those entities in the planning of this process, or planning of the conference. So it's just a suggestion to you to probably include those people.
Okay. Anything else that we want to hear about?
You probably let Elwin and them know we got the concrete dates, right, for September?
Yeah, I think it ended up being September 10, 11, and 12.
Okay.
So Wednesday, opening night reception, and then all day Thursday and Friday.
How far out, like you said with the tours, is like 14 miles too far?
No,
I've got one in mind. Great. The Hart, I'm gonna talk to Darla. What, is our Harkin store leaking or not? Is it open, or can you get access to it? Then also Fort Ridgely,
Ridgely.
Yep.
Yeah,
which
that
has
would,
got a lot of history.
that's very
to it.
good.
yeah.
Don't know. I know it's closed, but can we break in?
And that's the one that has a kind of a partnership ownership through the Minnesota Historical Society still?
Is it? It's a collage.
Yeah, it's part of the Minnesota and Nicollet County.
Yeah, so there might be a way to communicate with them, and then, I don't know if they would want to get involved or would need to if that were to pan out.
But it'd be a nice road right on the way to Fort Ridgely and back.
Yeah,
The Harkin store.
yep.
Okay.
Anything else?
More questions? All right.
Thank you for the info.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very informational.
Right.
All right. I guess the next thing is to decide what you want for the next regular January meeting.
January and February meetings, yes, both the regular meetings fall on holidays in January and February, so we need to move those out. So dates that I checked with office staff, January 22nd and 23rd would be open at this time. And then February 19th and 20th would also be open at this time. So we need to know what preference we want so I can let staff know to put it down on the calendar to save it.
Makes no difference for me.
That makes no difference for me.
I would suggest then we go on the Thursday,
The 23rd.
23rd and the 20th.
The 20th?
If that is
Yeah,
okay.
That's, okay. 23rd and 20th it'll be. I'll let staff know. We'll get those reserved. And then I'll look and see what we can get here before,
Before
week
that
of-
meeting?
yeah, the week of January 6th. See what we can do in that timeline and get that out to you also for that.
All right.
Mayor?
I guess the city has a report. We'll turn it over to the mayor.
Okay.
I'm here tonight to recognize our volunteers and want to express deep appreciation to all of you who serve as volunteers on our city commissions. We have 17 boards and commissions, and that includes 92 volunteers who actively serve on those commissions to help staff like Elwood move forward with projects with direction and also support and make those recommendations to City Council, to Dave and others. So it's exciting for those of us who are elected officials to be able to be in the presence of those of you who choose to come in and dedicate, whether it's monthly, quarterly, during the year, to support these different commissions. And tonight it's all about Jeannie. And Jeannie, as you know, has been actively involved with your commission for a number of years.
Yes.
And this is officially your last meeting.
Yes.
So on behalf of the City of New Ulm, want to express our deep appreciation and thanks to you for sharing your expertise and your talent and your leadership decision-making with the city of New Ulm. And I have for you a recognition award. Jeannie. So, on behalf of the city of New Ulm, thank you so much for your service. I
Yes.
hope this doesn't mean that you are to disconnect, because there is a conference coming up.
I know. I know.
So, thank you for
Okay.
your service.
You are so welcome. Thank you very much. Yes, very much. I appreciate it. And I did state that I would volunteer to help with the conference coming up. So I will be available. Apparently Deb doesn't have anything. So this meeting is adjourned.